thank you all for joining, and let us begin. I'll wait just to see if a couple more people come in, but I would like to record again. I did find it, as promised last time, I did, and I think maybe several others on the Board of Business went through the recording, so I could actually write down, all the different opinions, expressed in the meeting last week. And I do have, as I also sort of promised, I made in my own mind, a summary, which I have run by several people on the board. And, but this is just, my interpretation of what people said and what the most important stuff was. And I want to point out that I'm more than willing for you all to say, no, that's garbage, let's try something different. And the Board of Business might say that this coming Thursday, and Church Council may be, but my assessment of exactly what, not exactly, of the general thrust of what happened, we did promise we were going to sort of define or refine things just a little bit. And so I have attempted to do that. And so I'll see if I can do this again, share the screen here with people. Actually, I'm going to start recording now. Okay, everybody, you can note that you'll be recorded. It was decided by, I guess, council exec that we not share this recording with everybody in the congregation, but that it would be okay for me to let the Board of Business members who weren't able to make the meeting last week and the one this week look at it. So that's the only dissemination it's going to be. But I'm going to hit recording here. Okay, we'll try to hit recording. It says it is recording.
Yeah, we know it's going to end up on YouTube.
Yeah, right, good, okay. It looks like it says recording. All right, well, let's see. Okay, so I'm gonna try to share my screen here with this, streamline. Are you guys seeing that now? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
so looking over, I actually looked over both the video from last week's meeting, plus there also was a video made of the council meeting in June where we discussed this a little. We'll discuss it more. But so far, and so I have sort of three different options here. Only two people have expressed really strong interest in giving all the funds back. And a couple of people last week suggested maybe we should just give all the funds to charitable organizations in Gainesville, Alachua County. Sanford also suggested maybe we could combine our funds with those of other churches to make a very large fund. But most of the people who spoke both at the Church Council a couple of months ago and last week seem to be leaning, I thought, towards some sort of middle ground. And so my thought, not all of this was expressed, some of this is my own idea, but there were a number of people who said we should definitely apply for forgiveness, and it was straightened out that, it was determined that we would get forgiveness. Catherine has assured us of that, and that we can take the money and we can give it back if we want to. So for maximum flexibility, I'm suggesting that we will put the entire amount that's forgiven into a designated fund just to hold it see if we need it. Then again, people talked about, will we make our budget or not? I would say even if we draw upon our capital reserves, which we don't want to do, if we still don't make the budget, that we at least use this money, and people seem to think that the money was spent on keeping people employed that we otherwise might have laid off, was a useful thing that we could do something with, even if we end up paying back the rest in some way, so that that by the time you add up all the people, that comes to approximately $20,000. And we have not decided this, but I would say that since we have been able to pay these folks through September, we ought to try to keep paying everybody through the end of the year for our budget. But again, just my feeling, the board supported definitely paying them through September, and we have to decide and get council to approve continuing. And then if we do make the budget for 2020, we give back either to the feds or to various charitable organizations by the church the salaries and benefits paid to ministers and permanent staff, but we keep, again, this approximately 20 to 25K as a buffer against further problems due to COVID in 2021, because several people, I think particularly Susan Carey last time, said they thought, it's not obvious we're going to be able to do quite what we want to do next year, because the pandemic will continue to a certain extent anyway. So this is a sort of a streamlined summary, and but people want to use that as a basis for comment and either say, no, let's add this or that, or, change. I'll be happy to accommodate that. But okay, Karen.
Thanks, John. I'm not sure exactly which one this is a variation of, but it might be another variation. But here, I've been thinking about this a lot this week, and not only do we have the potential for needing a buffer, not knowing what's going on with the budget, but it seems to me it's likely we're also to have some additional expenses as a result of COVID. Maybe we need to improve ventilation systems. Maybe we need hand sanitizing stations. Maybe we want to improve our technology or whatever. And so I kind of came up with an idea of possibly using up to 50% of the money that we would keep as for internal purposes, be that as a budget buffer, like I said, be it as to improve our campus as it pertains to safety issues, be it, for improving technology, whatever we might need, because there's a lot of high risk people that aren't going to be able to come back to church for a while. And then to have the other 50% go out into the community, perhaps under the auspices of the Social Justice Committee or Compassion in Action, but to either then go to organizations in the community that are helping people deal with food insecurity or other issues, or else perhaps some of it to be retained in our own emergency fund. And so, like I said, I don't know where that falls into the whole game plan here, but that's kind of what I came to myself.
Okay. I'll add that in. I would think potentially that's up here as part of number 2. It's not giving any back, but we sort of now split and we give half of it to charitable organizations and keep half of it for ourselves. Bill Hoppy had raised his hand. Bill, you want to say something?
John, I just had a question. 3B, the 20,000, is that through September or through the end of the year?
That's how much we took out of the PPP funds. We've been talking about child care aides, but there's also Tanae, there's also all of our child care coordinators that we continue to pay because they were able to work on activity time and all that. And so when Catherine provided a sort of an additional breakdown of the money, a little more detailed of who were the ones we might have laid off, and it adds up almost to 20K. If you also, I guess, include the utilities and the mortgage, the interest on the mortgage. But that's just how much we did take already. We will then have to pay some, approximately maybe half that much to finish the year out because we didn't start doing it until May. So,
thank you.
I wanted to bring one other thing up, which is, I think, good. I haven't had a chance to study it, but Catherine sort of hustled and sent this morning a draft statement of where we stand budget-wise at the end of August. We won't totally have that until she checks on Monday, but our income now is slightly below the 66%, but only slightly below 1 or 2%. But our expenses remain almost 10% below 66%. The end of August is 2/3 of the year. So we're still approximately 10% to the good. But as we predicted, income is sort of dropping off slowly but surely because of all those prepaid pledges. But thus far now, 4 months through serious COVID, maybe 5, we're still hanging in there, mainly because our expenses aren't that much because we have a closed campus. So one other thing that was commented on, which we don't know who this is except the ministers, but we have these 3 funds that are helping people who are potentially helping people who have in the church or who come to us who've been impacted by COVID. And the Corona Contingency Fund has been added to, but the church has not chosen to take anything out of it. So we have that fund remains good. The Emergency Loan Fund remains good, but the what's it called, Operation Hope, which is something that some anonymous person donates $1,000 a month to, that donation was put, but $2,000 was taken out of that for someone. And only Andy and Talia, I think, know who that might be. But we are having some call on our emergency funds, just not excessive yet, but that's more than has been taken out in the last few months anyway. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing this if that's okay.
Yeah.
Now we had some hands up. Is that true? Yes, John Harvey, did you want to?
Yeah, I guess just to give my sort of overview as I've thought about this, I really am not comfortable spending money on things that were different than what it was designated for. And so I think while it's nice to think that we as a church could spend it better than the federal government, which is I'm sure is true, it puts us in a pretty, to me, it's it brings a kind of an ethical concern. I remember seeing recently on television where some guy got his money and then he used his money to pay his employees, but that freed up enough money. He put up Trump signs all along the highway, big thing. He spent $100,000 on signs, which he thought was, I'm sure, better use of the money than the federal government might have done. But what we could, certainly, I think, really dangerous if you start getting together with other churches. Before long, this looks like, problem with separation of church and state. And I just think that really gets sticky. I think if we're going to use it if we really are paying for staff we wouldn't pay for because we don't need childcare workers and stuff like that, then that makes some sense and we might consider keeping that. But I guess I'm just at a place where I think if you can't use it for what it's designated for, then it gets to a slippery slope. That's where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Others is it. Liz, do you have your hand up? No. Want me to? Well,
there. Okay. So what I've been wrestling with all week, I've been going back to my graduate training in moral development and the greater good. And I just can't come up with what I think is the greater good. I think I'm thinking about the debt of the government, and this is just, all of this money is just increasing the debt. And so, simplistically, we didn't need it, so we should pay it back, do our part to keep the debt down. But I'm not an economist, so I don't know how that really plays out. But then I think about, the intent was to keep people from having to go on unemployment, to be able to provide food and shelter for themselves. And so if maybe the greater good is to use that money to help people provide food and shelter, people who would not have gotten the money through the CARES Act. So those are just some of the things that I've been reflecting on. I'm not sure what the greater good is.
we did have Julie Ansbach. You have your hand raised?
I like Sanford's idea of pooling money with other churches. And if that was done, could it be done as an endowment fund that would keep on giving if enough funds came in? That's my idea.
Okay. Bill, your hand is still, is that a new question, Bill, or is your hand still raised from before?
Before.
Okay, Fred.
Yeah, I'm with John and have voiced already my reservations about taking this government money if our budget is, if we can live within our budget and do so, then I think that's what we should do. I'm not of the majority opinion, apparently, and So if I go to the next level and consider what the majority might wish to do, which is to utilize some part of it, then I have a real problem. And I think, as John was indicating, even if we were to just give the money to a charitable organization, which has been suggested, I have a real problem with that, because I think that's the kind of the easy way out. If we were to take money from the government and give it to somebody else to do good, we at least should be the ones that utilize it in our own programs, if we're going to do that, because that's what the intent of the PPP was, to assist us in this COVID situation and in our programs. And so I don't really, I have a real problem with taking money and then handing it to a third party to do some good. We should be the ones that do it. We should be willing to do the work that's involved in that. We have a coronavirus fund. That would be a natural place for this to go, but then we should be the ones that administer that. So, enough said.
So, but does that include, as someone's already suggested, that we give it to social justice, outreach, et cetera, and just have them decide what to do with it, and they'll end up giving it to various, Family Promise and other organizations, although they are ones that we have been supporting in the past. Is that all right with you, or is that still not quite the same?
Well, I would prefer that we utilize the funds for the intent that they were given. In other words, to alleviate the expenses that we have because of the COVID. Going beyond that, I mean, I think I would be willing, of course I'm willing, but if I'm not in the majority on that, then I think my preference would be to allow the church to decide how to utilize the funds, as long as they're utilizing them for their own programs. Now, I see the issue you're raising. That would be something that I think the church would have to decide, whether that is, an expanded version of something we already do, or whether it is also passing the buck to somebody else to administer something. So I think, that's my point. I don't want to beat it to death.
Oh, wait.
Sanford, he's saying he'd like.
Yeah, I want to retract my idea about pooling the money with other churches. I think that gets really complicated, because it means, multiple meetings, gatherings, this kind of stuff. And I'm concerned. I'd rather have it something that we determine that is focused. I think the focus of the CARES Act and payroll protection was also just the sustainability of organizations, so they could come through this whole project, this whole terrible COVID time, intact. And of course, many restaurants are going to fold, and many things won't be intact. So I'm not persuaded that it only should be used for salary kinds of reasons. I think the continued purpose of the organizations that are being sustained are what really matters, and outreach is one of our purposes. So at least I have rationalized it to that extent, and I realize we're in a big gray area that is not it's not simple. So, and I'm going to have to leave in about 10 minutes for another Zoom meeting, but I really appreciate people's willingness to take this kind of time to talk about it and work through it, so that the Board of Business and Council have a reasonable proposal that by most of the congregation can really not just support, but really endorse and feel that this was a good use of the funds. So,
Thank you. Liz, your hand is still up. Did you not lower it, or do you? No. Okay. All right. Other comments by folks? Wait, Dar wants to say something here.
Yes, so I do appreciate everybody taking the time, share their thoughts on. I sort of join John and Fred on the topic. I feel like the money was granted for this specific purpose. Catherine has verified that we've used the money for that specific purpose. So, I keep bouncing around on all the different ideas, but I just keep coming back to the purpose and intent of the money. And I do think we should wait till the end of the year to see if the money actually was used for the purpose that it was intended and kept us afloat. So that, that's just my, straight ahead. At the end of the day, I have to live with myself ethically and morally. And I also believe in a tinge of karma. So, just accepting money for an intended purpose feels like a holy thing to me.
Okay, John.
Yeah. I sort of do support the idea that we extend this past, September, that not knowing what's going to happen and being able to still use it for staff that we may not be able to pay for. I think one of the concerns, of course, is, if there's this pot of money out there, does this hurt our recruitment effort for next year's budget? People think, well, I don't have to give because there's a pot of money out there that'll cover it. So I think if you're going to use this, keep this funds there, that part needs to be clear to the congregation that we're only keeping it for things like we got to keep paying for childcare people that aren't working. We're not going to keep it to make up for a lack of budget response or something like that. So I'm supportive of the idea of not making a rash decision to give it back tomorrow. But I think some sort of plan that tells people this is what it's for. It's not going to help us really appreciably for next year's budget, unless, of course, we aren't doing childcare for the whole year or something.
Good. Stuart,
Oh, I have so much going around in my head, I can hardly figure it out. But I think at this point, I'm kind of like what Fred said. It's kind of a compromise in my mind. And using whatever money we can that's left over or is not used exactly the way it was taken for. I think back in one of my previous lives when I was chair of a board of deacons. You probably all know what that is, even though it's however known. I had charge of the checkbook, not the expenses, but the things that were given. And people would come and request money, and occasionally I was able to really help someone who needed it. I mean, really practically help someone by taking them and paying for a motel room because they were homeless. They needed a place to stay. And that was a very big thing, I thought. There were a couple of times when I made a couple of mistakes, but that's life. So I'm kind of thinking that we went into this year with so many unknowns, including the minister and all of that, and then COVID and whatnot. And I don't think we've finished with that. I don't think we know yet what the unknowns are. And I would like to feel that we had some money, and I know we have some, to be able to pay somebody's rent for a month or 2 months or whatever, if they needed it. And I think basically that expresses what I'm thinking about the whole thing. I agree with the comments I think John said of not doing anything right away, going through the process, and then getting into the new year and seeing where we are. So there.
Thank you.
2 cents.
Mary Ann.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's just so great to hear everybody so thoughtful about these complicated decisions. I'm going to take issue a little bit with Fred, the idea that we'd be passing the buck by supporting local nonprofits that are doing exactly what Stuart just described, helping people who have a system for doing that. We can do that on an ad hoc basis, but these are people who are set up, organized, know where the needs are and how to meet them. The nonprofits are really suffering too. And I think that is part of the intent of the CARES Act, is to keep people employed and doing the services and the businesses that we hope won't disappear because they can't make it. So I guess I'm a little more pragmatic, but it seems to me that there are conceivably a lot of needs we don't know how they're going to develop in our own church, potentially, but also in the community, and programs that we are already involved with that are doing really good work in the community. I don't see, for me, I don't have any problem with that as a way for us to contribute to keeping our community safe.
Thank you, Mary. Karen.
Yeah, part of this, I guess I don't have the same attachment to exactly what buckets things come from, but hearing that some people do, if we are leaning toward holding on to the money, you know, at least until the end of this year, I'm wondering if at that same time we could determine what are some of the additional expenses that we are going to have as a church as a result of COVID. Like I said, better technology or hand sanitizing stations or ventilation things or whatever. I mean, some of those things are not cheap. And would it be in the spirit of accepting this money then, is it if we essentially made a modification to this year's budget and said we're going to take $20,000 out of salaries and put it into ventilation, or $5,000 into hand sanitizing stations, and then turned around and accepted this money to allow us to continue the salaries? You know, to me, it's just a question of what bucket it comes from. But if we're going to have those legitimate COVID expenses, I think, you know, that's a way we can absolutely comply with the letter of the program and yet deal with some COVID things that we, in fact, need to be doing to keep ourselves together and safe as a congregation.
That's in line with someone already said that, something to that. Was it Sanford that talked about that? No. All right. Catherine, did you find out anything further about how rapidly we would be assured that once you apply for forgiveness, that we would know that happened and you know, could put it into a designated fund if that's what we choose to do?
No, I'm sorry, I didn't find that out this week. I will make a point of actually right now writing to our bank manager.
Yeah, Sharon. Let me unmute you. Can I unmute her? Okay.
Okay, I don't really like speaking up on these things, and I'm a newcomer to UCG, but I'm the daughter of a small town banker, and I grew up with the idea that you always pay back your loans and you use them for designated purpose. And that's very simplified, I know, but I just feel like, especially, we think we can spend this money so much more wisely than another church that got the money, but it might be a church that we really don't go along with anything that they believe in. And why do we think that we should keep it to spend the way we want to spend it when it was supposed to be for salaries? And that's my feeling on this. I think it should go for what it was designated for, and then at the end of the year, if we can pay it back, I think we should pay it back. I know it's just to the government, but in the long run, we're all going to be paying for this. So
that feeling was expressed by Stan Smith, I think, last week also about, you know, some other church might choose something that, you know, we would not agree with at all to use the money for. So.
Exactly.
That's all.
Other comments? Oh, all right, Fred?
I'm just observing that it seems that we have a consensus on waiting at any rate, rather than doing anything precipitously here in September. And so I guess that is some progress if we can agree that that's a good idea. And then there is a lot of, I think, sentiment around making this decision about, in the event that we make our budget, then what do we do with the rest of the money? That is much more problematic. So I think we've made some progress in that nobody seems to be saying we need to do this right now.
Wait, John?
I guess the one thing I think that maybe would be more useful to do now is to sort of have a plan that you could explain to people, hopefully such that it doesn't impact pledging for the next year, so that people say, okay, this is going to be used in a way, even if it's by some of the suggestions that I would not necessarily support, but if it was going to be used in a way that says, this is not going to help us pay Andy's salary. This is going to be used for whatever, because we're going to pay Andy's salary. We're going to pay all of our senior minister's salary. We may not be able to pay childcare people or something. But I think if you had even if the plan is we're going to save this money and use it for housing costs for people that can't afford rent, something that tells people we're not just using this, to just cover next year's budget.
Okay, thank you. Peter, you've had your hand up. I'm sorry, I didn't. There you go.
I just wanted to observe, like George was observing, that this discussion has gotten more mature over these last two sessions. That we're beginning to come to a consensus, and I think the addition that John is giving us like this, that we designate it so that it doesn't detract from our pledging and so on like this, is really we're beginning to have a mature way of looking at this fund. And I think we should compliment ourselves on that.
Thank you. I'll note that at least two members of the enlistment committee, Liz and Sanford, who is a representative from the board, have been taking part in these. So I'm sure, given how creative they all are, and Andy and Tracy and all that, that they will come up with a very good way of presenting this to, if we decide to go this way, as part of the enlistment, so it does not detract from regular giving, I'd say. Tom had a question over here.
Hi, thank you. I feel that when we make a declaration that we should pay the loan back based on the idea, the values that perhaps the money is sort of tainted in some way, or there are other obligations that we feel we have to pay the loan back. Is that a higher level form of commitment than somebody's need to pay rent? Somebody's need to pay rent is a very on the ground need versus our sort of very privileged point of view that we should be paying something back and not using it for the greater good of the community, however large. That's all.
Yeah, I think last week Maureen Killeran was talking about, sort of legal morality versus, sort of humanistic morality, and that sort of speaks to that point, right? So.
Tom, that's Killeran.
Killeran, right. So you learn something every day. How about that?
It's very Irish.
Yeah. Shelby, were you wanting to say something, or were you just agreeing?
Sure. I just wanted to make the comment that looking at the bigger picture, first of all, let's remember this is a one-time thing. It's not like we're going to get this money every year, probably never again, and it's due to a global pandemic that's never happened before in our lifetime, and it's an extraordinary circumstance. I hear, Dar, I hear what you're saying totally. I would argue that use of some of these monies for the health of the congregation overall and meeting our church expenses does, although indirectly, it does contribute to protecting salaries. We don't know what's going to happen, you know, with the budget and all that stuff. But if we just have that money available a little longer to look at how expenses are going to go, that can help potentially keep people in jobs as well. And that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
So I guess one thing I could, you know, I'm just a big fan of detail and documentation, so I could actually join Karen's last comment about, you know, figuring out the budget in a way that you start to redistribute money where we actually need it, but keep that salary line item and that budget and the loan money that came for the salaries. So, I mean, it's just, I know that we're kind of like, it's kind of like switching buckets around, but for me, the documentation of switching the budget needs towards COVID response and then actually having needed the money for the salaries to keep going, you know, feels appropriate to me.
Other comments? Well, it's not been an hour, but we've gotten a lot of good input. Unless anybody else wants to say anything, I think we can, again, I and the board very much appreciate everything. Andy has to say something, yes?
So the reason the council exec voted that we would not be able to share this with the wider community is because people were not aware that we were recording it. And so I would say if anyone has made any comments during this meeting that they would prefer not be made public, let me know and we can keep this video private. But if you're comfortable with it, I think this would be a terrific discussion to be able to share with the wider community. So if anyone has made a comment that they would not be comfortable having shared with the wider church, let me know privately, and I will let the Board of Business know on Thursday as to whether or not we could share this with everyone else.
Mary Ann?
I mean, we had a really rich discussion last week. It seems like people would need to have a chance to hear both of those discussions because there are things we talked, I don't know. I think that that was really an important precursor. Not all of us were here both times, but for those of us who were, I think there are things that were said then that weren't said today because they had already been said. So I have a little bit of a problem. I just wanted to clarify, we have indeed used the funds exactly for what they were designated for.
That is correct.
That is not the issue. The issue is, since our budget could have covered some of those things, should we give back part of it? So it's not a question of taking this money and using it for something that it was not for. That's my understanding.
That's right. Catherine did an excellent job of documenting every single payment for each you know, entity that was allowed, and you know, keeping track of how much went to this and how much went to that each month. So we know, I'm believing, and I think Catherine believes too, that she'll have no real problem, you know, filling out whatever paperwork is necessary or electronic paperwork to get it forgiven, that we've done it exactly right. So Andy, do you think maybe I should look, maybe I can do this, can look at the, guys hear me? Yeah, my screen's, I don't have a little yellow button around, I'm a yellow square. Maybe I don't need that because I'm the host. I could look at who all was on the seminar last week and compare them with the people here and get in touch with them also and ask them to get to tell you if there was anything they said they didn't want done, and then you could give approval if that's the case for both of the Zoom meetings to be available.
I think that's a great idea. Rebecca, Dar, do you two have thoughts on that? Because you were also privy to the council exec conversation earlier this week.
I think that's fine. I just, as long as people know that it was being shared. So if you backtrack to talk with them.
Yeah. I mean, what do we have here? I'm seeing 15, 18, and Sanford made 19, actually only 17 because you have Stewart on here twice, but there were like 22 or 23, I think, last time. So there are 5 or 6 additional people who were here last time. I know Stan Smith was, for sure. I remember him, and but we'll check with them too. I can find them out. So, Fred.
So the assumption here is then that if you do find the other people and they all approve of it, that we are also implicitly improving our participation from last week in addition to the participation from today. That's just an assumption, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Well, thank you all then for taking the time again this week, or for the first time this week. And again, it's exactly the kind of input we really need to make sure we craft some sort of a path forward that's going to be, approved by council after their discussion, as well as hopefully then by the whole church on, was it the 3rd of October, whatever that, 3rd or 4th, I forget, but the 4th. Okay, yeah, good. Okay. Good. Thank you then. I will cease recording and can't stop the meeting.